We're gonna start in just one more minute, but you should be able to hear me. I haven't said anything until now, which is why you haven't heard our sound, but we'll be starting in just 1 minute. Okay. I can start.
Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jeremy Wimpheimer, and on behalf of Tzora Admei V'Eslim, I welcome you all. We know this is a difficult day for Israel all over the country, and particularly in the south and now in the center as well. And some of you may even be watching from your shelters. We obviously understand if you have to leave, if the siren goes off, but we're obviously thinking of all the people across the country, and in particular the army, and wish them all the best, and that everybody should, the mission should be completed and everyone should return home safely. Before I begin, I just want to thank the AACI for being involved and helping spread the word about this important event. Just in Tzora has a long history of working together with the AACI, and just about that, we're going to post in the chat. Rabbi Yehoshua Grunstein of Tzohar will be hosting a joint Shavuot program together with AACI. There's still some spaces available, so we'd be happy to have you join with that as well. And you can find more information in the link, which is will soon be posted in the chat. I know many of you have joined us before, but Tzora Admei V'Eslim is an initiative which helps families dealing with very difficult situations, often with the end of life or with other medical or ethical crises. And we invite you to be in touch at any time. We have a hotline that is available to help, and we'll be sending out information regarding that as well. But this is a very important initiative of Tzohar, which has helped people both in Israel and increasingly around the world. So again, our panel will be opened by Professor Charles Sprung, who is the director emeritus of the General Intensive Care Unit at Hadassah Hebrew University Medical Center. Professor Sprung is an expert in palliative care and in intensive care, and is obviously extremely experienced and well suited to address the topic at hand. Professor Sprung is going to be referencing during his presentation 2 links to the official government forms that are relevant to the issue of advanced directives. So those were emailed to you, and they're also available in the chat, but it might be helpful for you to have them in front of you as we go through the presentation. He'll be followed by Rav Yuval Sherlow, who's the director of the Center for Jewish Ethics here at Tzohar, who is also one of the world's leading experts in medical ethics and the interaction between ethics and halakha. So we're very pleased to have both of our esteemed members on the panel. And with that, I'm proud to introduce Professor Sprung to begin the program. Just need to unmute yourself. There you go.
I did. Okay, thank you very much. Good evening. Over the last year, I've given several lectures on advanced medical directives in cooperation with AACI and Tzohar to help people make the right end-of-life decisions. Several individuals have told me they've been very helpful for them and gave them important information. And when they asked them if they had filled out the forms, they said, no, they're still sitting in my drawer. So tonight, I hope to offer practical advice in completing advanced directives. So more people, hopefully many of you, will complete them. I will be discussing advanced directive forms that provide medical instructions for receiving or avoiding life-prolonging medical treatment based on the dying patient law or Achok Anot Elamut. The forms apply only to individuals who at the time of the medical treatment are dying patients defined in the law as up to 6 months to live despite medical treatment, or dying patients in a terminal state defined as up to 2 weeks to live, and at that time are legally incompetent to make decisions. As noted in my previous lectures, there are two main types of advanced directives: a durable power of attorney, which we call in Israel an ipui koach, and the living will. Both advanced directives are completed at a time an individual is mentally competent and able to make decisions for a time in the future when he or she may be unable to make decisions. The forms are typically valid for 5 years. A living will is a legal document that states the types of medical treatments someone wishes for their end-of-life medical care. Sometimes the stated situations in a living will do not occur, and in addition, if an apotropos or a legal representative is required, in Israel, one has to go to court for the appointment, and one doesn't know who the patient would have wanted to represent him. I personally prefer the abridged durable power of attorney, or ipui koach, as it is simpler and provides more flexibility. I will discuss this form in my first lecture. Now, the abridged ipui koach does not apply to individuals who at the time of completing the forms are defined as dying patients, nor to an ongoing power of attorney form, which many of you may have filled out, which are completed with qualified attorneys and pertain to monetary and medical treatment. The latter forms do not apply to the terminally ill patients. The abridged ipui koach form is simpler than the living will, and it does not require an attorney, physician, or nurse, but the individual may not get medical information from a professional. Therefore, it is extremely important to have a conversation between the giver of the power of attorney and the proxy so that the proxy can represent the giver's preferences for end-of-life care to the physician. If questions arise, it may pay to consult with a medical professional, but this is not required for the completion of the form. The complete ipui koach form, which I won't go into tonight, does require an attorney, physician, or nurse, and that form can be completed by a terminally ill patient. The ipui koach allows a person to appoint a proxy to decide in his or her place about the medical treatment that will or will not be administered to him or her. As the ipui koach does not indicate the medical treatments the individual would want, it is extremely important for the appointed person to discuss at length what the person would want under different circumstances. Therefore, I usually review the living will treatment options when I discuss end-of-life decisions with people who have completed an ipui koach. I will do this in my second lecture. The two types of advanced directives are available in the links, which you can, hopefully you downloaded or printed out, and they're available in the chat so that you can look at them and follow along with me. I have checked with Dr. Zuckert at the Ministry of Health, who confirms that these English forms, which I have received from her, can be used and submitted to the Ministry of Health, but they must be completed in Hebrew. Now, I'll try to discuss the abridged durable power of attorney forms, important administrative information that you should be aware of. A photocopy of your Tehudat Zehut and appendix must accompany every form. Witnesses who are not your relatives must sign at the same time and date as the person giving the power of attorney who signs in the witness's presence. Original forms only must be sent by registered mail to the Ministry of Health's address in Jerusalem. And as mentioned, all the forms have to be completed in Hebrew, even the English form that we're going to be talking about tonight. So please look at the downloaded or printed forms that you have, and I'll go over some of the most salient points. On page 1, And Dina, can you show that can you share the screen and perhaps show that? So you can see on page 1, we have information of the person appointing the ipui koach, and we hopefully will see the name, Teudat Zehut of that person. If you're a tourist, you can also put in your foreign passport number. The Ministry of Health will accept that also. Your address, year of birth, your cell phone number, and email address. Dina, we're going to, that's the first page. Let's move down a little, Dina, to page 1 at the very bottom. And you can see here's the information I just mentioned. That would be for the person appointing the ipui koach. Page 2, if we can move down a little further, is information about the ipui koach or the proxy. And again, we can see the name, the Teudat Zehut number, the cell phone number, or the email address. Now, moving further down to page 3, we have information for up to 4 additional proxies. And you can see it's the same type of information here, the name, Teudat Zehut, cell phone number, or email address. And you can appoint more than one proxy, but if you appoint additional proxies, you must fill out whether you want the proxies to act together or separately. And this is on the bottom of page 2. If we can just go back there for a second, Dina. You see, you just check off together or separately. And if separately, you have to fill out if the additional proxy will assume his or her position only if the previous proxy cannot serve in his or her position, or whether each proxy has his or her own alternative authority. And this is on the top of page 3. So you can see the additional proxy assuming position, it cannot serve in the position, or each proxy having alternative authority. Now, if you have decided on proxies and trust them equally, I suggest that you fill in each proxy has his or her own alternative authority. However, if you rely on one proxy more than another or the others, I suggest you fill in only if the previous proxy cannot serve in his or her position. Now, the end of page 3, if we go down on the form, reminds the individual that the power of attorney only takes effect if the person is a dying patient and does not have decision-making capabilities. Now I'm going to get to page 4. This is for information only about changing the ipui koach, 5 years validity and accessibility in a computerized system. It's just information. You don't have to do anything. Now, going to page 5, this relates to the fact that according to the dying patient law, treatments can be withheld if there is significant suffering. The English translation here on the top of page 5 doesn't talk about avoiding treatment. It talks about receiving treatment, which is incorrect. The Hebrew talks about limanah mitikul. So we're talking about not getting the treatment, but avoiding treatment for significant suffering. Now, significant suffering is defined in the law as pain or suffering that a reasonable person would be willing to make a considerable effort to avoid or eliminate, even if this involves a significant impairment in his quality of life or life expectancy. One can also add other conditions here that someone considers as significant suffering, where it is written, if you go down a little further, also any of the conditions specified below, and depending on people's preferences, just a little higher up, these could include requiring dialysis, amputation of a lung, of a leg, having severe or mild dementia, being bedridden, or always requiring a colostomy bag or diapers. You should think about what significant suffering means for you, and you can add that in. Now, on page 5, it also includes where you see right now, just a little further up, Dina, whether you want to avoid any kind of resuscitation or any type of artificial respiration, or you can see the big or there, if perhaps you're more religious or Haredi, you want to provide life-extending medical treatment, even when the doctors think it is not justified under the circumstances, and not to avoid any life-extending medical treatment. Now, I will discuss providing or avoiding different types of medical treatments in my second lecture. The top of page 6 reminds the individual that this power of attorney only takes effect if the person is a dying patient, and that this form is not valid for financial and property matters, which requires another form. Some people have filled out what they want to occur with various medical procedures, but again, that form does not apply to the terminally ill patients. One must fill out whether, in addition to the ipui koach, there are other advanced medical instructions, for instance, a living will. And if there are other advanced medical instructions, one must decide if there is a conflict between the forms which prevails, either the ipui koach or the other advanced directives. Now, page 7, we put in the signature and date of the person giving the power of attorney and the two witnesses, their names, Teudat Zehut numbers, address, cell phone numbers, and their signatures with date. And page 8, we have the name, date, and signatures of up to 4 proxies, which is recommended to be performed if there are additional proxies. Now, remember, it is important that the appointed proxy agrees to respect the person's wishes, because if they cannot, they should not be the surrogate decision maker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sprung. Just want to remind everybody that if anybody has any questions, they should post them in the chat, and we'll get to them after Rav Shirlow's presentation. And with that, I call upon Rav Shirlow.
Shalom, good night. And my English is not so good like what you heard before, but I'll try to express everything that I can. What actually I'm asking myself? I'm asking myself, what is the role of the rabbi in those aspects, and why should we as Torah rabbis try to pursue and to convince people to sign or to give advanced orders? So first of all, we are all human beings, and there is a common answer to everyone in the world, because if you give advanced orders, so we are being treated as we want it, according to the orders that we gave. It's very important for the family, because when the family doesn't know what exactly we want, then they argue. And when they argue, when we are very sick, it doesn't stop. And after 120 years, sometimes it's really tearing the family. One side is saying, you know what, we gave up too early. We had to fight with the doctors and try to force them to continue to ventilate or whatever. The second part will say, you know what, it was a torture. We had to stop much before. And in many times, in many cases, it's really tearing the family. Not only that, when the hospital staff has orders, knows exactly what we want, then they don't have to appoint the ethical committee. I'm a member of a few hospitals' ethical committees. For instance, tomorrow morning, I'm in one of the hospitals when there is a case that no orders, and we have to decide what to do. And there's also an argument between argue between the family and between the staff and what to do. So therefore, it's the right thing to sign and to give those advanced orders. So why people don't do that? So there is a common answer, again, for the whole world, but there are special things in the religious community. In the whole world, first of all, people don't like to speak about death, and they try to avoid or some put it aside or not to think about it, to cover it, to ignore it, to do whatever, but they don't want to speak about that. And not only that, they don't want to give orders and what to do and who to do whatever. People are lazy, like every one of us, and etc., etc. There are reasons why not. But there are special reasons in the religious community that I want to raise them and want to say that there's no case. I mean, there are not the reasons why not to sign those orders. The first one is Al tiftach pe Satan. Everybody knows this phrase and knows that we don't want to open our mouth for the devil. So therefore, once you speak about death or you speak about being very ill, probably he may take the advantage and be involved. So Al Tiftach Pe LaSatan may be something that is spiritual and whatever, but this is not a leader, and this is not a way that, according to that, we are not preparing ourselves for bad days. The opposite is the truth. We find many sources in the Gemara and the Halacha that everyone should prepare himself to the day when he will decline. And it's not opening to the devil the mouth, it's actually preparing ourselves, since we are not devils, towards the future. There are people that say, afilu cherev chada, when there's a very sharp sword on someone's neck, he should not avoid praying and alim natzmo min harachamim, from the mercy of the divine. That's right. And writing and giving the advance orders is not something that is avoiding praying and hoping and asking and singing al tashlichinu le'ed zikna, excuse me, kichlot kochenu al tazvenu. And there's a very known phrase of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Tzadik Livracha, that said, that's right, that when there's a sharp sword on our neck, we should not avoid mercy. But when it started to cut, then we must know what to do. And I think he was very wise, and he gave very good ideas and suggestions and recommendations, and he supported the idea of giving advanced orders. The third thing is that we are not used to the fact that we can choose. Usually when we're halacha keepers, we feel and we know and we were educated in all over our lives. We behaved according to rules. And actually, it's not our personal decision. It's what the halacha says, what the Torah said, what the rabbi said. And we sometimes feel that it's not something that we can decide what to do. When chas v'shalom we'll get to this point, so our family or the staff will ask a authority or a ethical or rabbinical authority, and he will decide. And we have to get used to that this is a wrong approach, because the halacha does recognize the fact that there are people that can decide we want to live and continue and even to suffer, but every brief is very important. And from the other hand, there is a permission to say enough is enough, and these are the things that we don't want that will be done. And there's no one answer to all the people. So therefore, our decisions and our recommendations and our wishes are an integral part of the future. So there, but we have to change, to the mode, because we are, as I said, we are used that there is a halacha answer. And the fourth thing, and this is one of the reasons why we established Zohar Ad 120, is that we really don't know what are the right orders, or what are we permitted to give and what are not. There is an image, for instance, that according to halacha, you should ventilate, if we're talking about nutrition, under any circumstances, you must do that. And I must admit that there are halacha paskin that said that nutrition is whatsoever is necessary, you cannot stop it. But today we know that this is not the right thing. And in some cases, nutrition may be even, or feeding, or artificial feeding may cause much more damage than something that is helpful. So therefore, the halacha the halacha actually recognize the scientific situation, and there are situations where when we stop even feeding. Or another example, are you permitted to, when you have horrible pain, to take pills or to have medicine that it may shorten your life? Our instinctive is, according to halacha, we are not permitted to do anything active in order to shorten life. But more or less all the rabbis today say that you are permitted to take this medicine, again, under a few circumstances, even if there's a danger that it will shorten life, unless, or at least we must be very honest with ourselves, and not in order to shorten life, but it may be a consequence of those medicine. So these are the reasons that, like, it's not only that we are normal and many people in the world didn't give advanced orders. We have the religious community have another floor that we have to face, and we have to ask ourselves, is there a order from the halacha not to give orders, advanced orders, or the opposite is the true, and we have all kinds of excuses or mistakes or something, wrong ideas about the halacha approach. This is the reason why we are here. We are here in order to say it's very important. It's very important for ourselves. It's important for our families, not to tear them. And it's important for the staff in the hospital and everyone that is taking care of us. And we'll get a better treatment if we'll give orders, or at least have someone that we will qualify or will appoint as someone that will represent us. And the halacha doesn't, everything that I said before, the devil and the sword and our self-decisions and whatever, all those issues are not stopping us. It's only instructions that we have to do things according to the ethical halachic approach. And as I said, this is the reason why Tzohar Ad 120 actually was established, in order to give everyone the information that it's possible, that it is important, and that there are lines and there are borders that we have to be inside of them, but people can give instructions, or at least, as I said, appoint someone that will represent them, and then everything will be much, I don't want to say better because it's not a good situation, but will be more, will be the right thing to do for the staff, for the family, and for ourselves.
Thank you very much, Shirlo. So we'll try to get through as many questions as we can. Some of them are practical type of one-line answer type of questions, so we'll just try to knock them off quickly. So the first question, this may have been answered already. How do you submit the forms to Misrad HaBriut? That can be done online, or you need?
No, if you look at the first form, there's an address for the Ministry of Health in Jerusalem, and you need the original forms sent by
Registered mail.
Registered mail.
Okay. Do the witnesses and the proxies all have to sign at the same time?
Yes.
Okay. Can a child be a witness on the form?
No, you need adults.
Okay.
The form for the abridged durable power of attorney talks about someone over a 17 or older, as opposed to the usual 18.
Okay. I believe this was referenced, but the form that we displayed was in both Hebrew and English. This is binding in Israel, correct?
Yes, those both forms that have been appeared before and in the chat were the forms sent to me by the Ministry of Health. Okay.
If an individual has no medical directive or power of attorney under Israeli law, who makes the end-of-life decisions?
Typically, it's made by the physicians together with the family. But if you look at the terminally ill law, the Chok Hanotel Lamut, besides the advanced directives and the durable power of attorney, if the individual had made statements to family members or close friends, those also can be used. And physicians are constantly looking for any kind of information that they could get from the family members, as most of these patients are not able to speak for themselves, to give us some idea what the patient would want for themselves.
I want to emphasize one point about that. According to the Israeli law, the family actually doesn't have any status of making medical decisions. It's only between the physicians and the patient, and if it's not available, they do it with the ethical committee or whatever, because I can explain what is the reason and what is the problem, but I will not go into it. But Professor Charles is right. Practically, the staff always are asking the family to give information to what he wanted or whatever, because of two reasons. The first one, they do believe that the family is the best representative of the patient, and this is the source of information. And the second reason, we must admit, it's also very important for the hospital that nobody will argue, will complain against them. You know, you made the decisions, not we. And if they'll do things not according to the family, then they'll find themselves, the hospital will find itself in the court. But I want again to emphasize, according to the law, the family doesn't have any position of making decisions without those documents.
Another practical question: if the child lives outside of Israel, is that allowed, or does it have to be signed in person?
All the signatures have to be in person at the same time and then sent. Yes, so that would be a problem.
Okay. How binding is the patient's wishes on the physician? If a treating physician, can a treating physician be held liable if he withholds treatment based on the patient's wishes?
So it depends on what the patient's wishes are and if that is legal or not. So under most cases, if someone is in a terminal state based on the law and is suffering, and we're providing palliative care, Rav Cherlo talked about halakhic, but also legally there's a clause in the Chok Hanot Elamut, which if a physician is withholding treatment based on the patient's wishes, especially if the patient is suffering, then or even if he treats the patient, let's say with doses of morphine to relieve the suffering, and it requires higher doses and the blood pressure decreases or the patient's respirations decrease, even if something happens, that physician would not be liable legally based on the law for providing palliative care.
Okay.
On the other hand, if I've had patients who've requested that we turn off the ventilator, and according to Israeli law, we are not allowed to withdraw a treatment that would hasten the patient's death, and clearly a continuous form of treatment like a ventilator cannot be withdrawn. So we would want to follow the patient's wishes, but obviously we can't do something that's illegal.
Rav Cherlo, you might want to take this. When a patient's wishes contradict halacha, what happens in such a case?
The halacha doesn't have any position in the Israeli law, so therefore the question is if it's against the law or not against the law. If we're talking about a Jewish state and a halachic state, probably this situation will, the doctors will say, we are not going to do anything not according to halacha, but it doesn't mean anything in the state because the rules and the law is the state law and not the halacha law.
Jeremy, I might be able to offer some insights on that.
Sure.
We've done many studies on end-of-life practices around the world, and the decisions physicians make depend on their culture and what their beliefs are. So it's very, very important to know what your physician might want. So for instance, when I was practicing medicine in Florida, it was legal to turn off a ventilator. It was against the halakha, but for me, being an Orthodox Jewish physician, for me, I could not withdraw a ventilator even though it was legal. So a physician who respects the halakha might have problems even if it might not necessarily be considered illegal in Israel, whereas a physician who isn't worried about the halakha may have a different perspective and action.
Okay. All right, we'll try to get some of the other questions after the next part of the program.
Jeremy,
yeah.
One thing I want to emphasize. One thing I don't know if Professor Charles will speak about it. So I want to say it right now. Something very practical. In a few cases that people gave terrific orders and advanced orders, they weren't kept. And the reason was technical, because they collapsed at home, the ambulance came, immediately were ventilated, or the staff of the ambulance asked, are there orders? And the family said, yes, they are, but we don't have them here. It's there with whatever. You have 20 seconds to make the decisions, and they are not authorized not to take care and not to ventilate, for instance, the patient. So it's very important to add another comment and say, once you signed and once you gave the orders, everyone should know it, and around you, and it should be very accessible, that immediately when chas v'shalom something happens, everybody will know about it. Because sometimes, and it happened not once and not twice, it happened a few times, where your orders weren't kept because nobody could prove that these are your orders. So I'm emphasizing this point right now.
Okay.
I agree. I've had several cases like that. And if you're calling MADA, make sure if you do have the forms are ready to show them as soon as they arrive.
Okay. And with that, let's move on, and Professor Sprung introduce for the second part of our program.
Okay, so my second lecture will deal with living will forms, which is called here, if you've downloaded the form, Advanced Medical Directives. Advanced medical instructions are given by a person with mental capacity for decisions, in which he or she specifies his or her desires for future medical treatment when he or she is terminally ill, specifying his desires for future medical treatment, and at a time when he or she does not have legal capacity and cannot articulate exactly what he or she would want. In deciding on which life-saving interventions to undergo or to avoid, people have to weigh their decisions based on their different medical illnesses. Interestingly, in our ETHICAT study of approximately 2,000 doctors, nurses, patients, and families, less respondents desired life-prolonging interventions when they had permanent unconsciousness rather than terminal illnesses. I will not repeat the information that was required for the Ipoi form I discussed in my first lecture, but I will note what is different here for the living will or advanced medical directive form. I will not have time to go through all aspects of the living will. So if we look at page 1, and Dina, if you could put up page 1, individuals will check that their current medical condition has been determined that they are a dying patient. Should be at the bottom of the page. Here it is, my current medical condition, that I am a dying patient. And then further down, they receive medical information from the doctor or nurse whose name they write in there. On page 2, the doctor, nurse, or specialist completes the detailed medical information given to the patient to understand the medical procedures that he or she wants to avoid or receive. On page 4, one can also add other conditions that they consider as significant suffering for themselves, and the form itself, actually a little further down, gives specific conditions which for you would be considered a significant suffering. And the form, as you can see here, talks about requiring to be artificially fed or nourished, quadriplegic, dementia, or requiring specific treatments. And you can add the specific treatments where you see the lines. And if we go down a little further, or having specific conditions, and you can talk about specific conditions like Alzheimer's disease, or that you're not having cognitive functioning, that you would not want to receive under those circumstances. Now, page 5 lists the procedures, and you can see the procedures to be performed or not performed. You would circle which ones you want performed or not. And if you look through them, it discusses resuscitation in any possible way, resuscitation by external cardiac massage, which is cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, or pumping on someone's chest, resuscitation by an endotracheal tube. That's a tube that's put in the trachea that's typically used to hook up to a ventilator, resuscitation by administering resuscitation drugs, resuscitation by electric shock, connection to a ventilator, dialysis, major surgery, minor surgery, radiotherapy for malignant diseases, chemotherapy for malignant diseases, antibiotic treatment for sepsis, which is a severe infection, which is resistant to regular antibiotic treatment, or diagnostic tests. Now, a little further down, the form mentions a timer, which is basically a Shabbos clock for a ventilator, which was part of the original dying patient law, but unfortunately does not currently exist, so you can just disregard this. Page 6 discusses the same exact procedures not to be performed or to be performed in a terminally ill patient in the final state, with the addition of a few other things: routine procedures, treating accompanying diseases, such as insulin for diabetics, giving food or liquids artificially, and giving palliative treatment and drugs. Now, as we've been discussing the law, and we have to determine which medical treatments we want or not by advanced directives and by an ipoi koach for a patient who can no longer make decisions, the forms are not as important as the discussions themselves with family members or proxies. Individuals must decide and discuss what is best for them. This includes what you consider suffering and different procedures you would want to receive or not, depending on your medical illness and the stage of the disease. These illnesses, and we can cut out the forms now. These diseases typically involve different types of cancer, brain injury, dementia, and some of the illnesses I mentioned in the suffering category. You can turn off the forms now. Not infrequently, a person's wishes change during the course of a disease. Now, to help you understand the variables involved, I will summarize my own wishes that I have told and written to my proxies. So if I'm healthy, as I am today, I would want to receive all of the treatments and interventions noted on page 5 of the Ministry of Health form for advanced directives that we just went over. And these include, for my own wishes that I've told my proxies and I've written, with or without resuscitation medications, I would want all the resuscitations include shocking, which is cardioversion and defibrillation, intubation, ventilation, dialysis, large or small operations, chemotherapy, radiation, antibiotics for sepsis, for resistant organisms, and diagnostic tests. In addition, I would want to receive interventions not mentioned in the form, including more invasive feeding, such as a feeding tube, a nasogastric tube, which we typically call a zonda, or total parenteral nutrition, or TPN. Now, if I'm in a state with significant suffering, and again, that's defined as pain or suffering in the Ministry of Health ipoi koach form, which I discussed previously, that a reasonable person would take actions to avoid or remove. Now, in addition, in my ipoi koach, I added other conditions which I considered significant suffering for myself. The first was 3 advanced irreversible organ system failures, and the main organs that doctors typically think of are the brain, heart, lungs, kidney, liver, and coagulation system. And when 3 or more organs are involved, the chances of surviving are very, very low. So under those circumstances, I would not want active treatments. Or a second option that I've put in for significant suffering is irreversible injury of cognitive brain functioning. So under those circumstances, I would not want any of the treatments or interventions noted on page 5 of the Ministry of Health form for advanced directives. Under those circumstances, however, I would want to continue receiving food and liquids by mouth if it would not cause harm. Now, if I'm diagnosed as terminally ill with less than 6 months to live, the treatments and interventions I would want would depend on how far advanced my disease was, my quality of life, suffering that was controlled by medication, and a good likelihood that the treatments or interventions would be helpful. So under those circumstances, I would not want to undergo CPR, but I would want to receive resuscitation medications or shocking, intubation or ventilation if it was likely to be only for a limited time, dialysis, large or small operations, chemotherapy, radiation, all antibiotics, and diagnostic tests. If, on the other hand, I was towards the end of my terminal illness with a moderate or poor quality of life, suffering that was controlled or not by medication, or a poor likelihood that the treatments or interventions would be helpful, I would not want to undergo CPR, nor receive resuscitation medications or shocking, no intubation, no respirator, no dialysis, no large or small operations, chemotherapy, radiation, antibiotics for sepsis, or other diagnostic tests. Under these circumstances, again, I would want to continue receiving food and liquids by mouth if it did not cause harm. Now, examples in between these two extreme examples should be determined by balancing how far advanced my disease was, my quality of life, suffering, and the likelihood that the treatments and interventions would be successful. My proxies know my general desires and know exactly, I think, what I would want. So in conclusion, I have summarized how to complete the advanced directives and Ipui Koach forms. More important, I've explained the important issues that people have to discuss and decide on to help them make the right end-of-life decisions for themselves. These include defining suffering, the life-saving procedures to be performed or not to be performed, for which illnesses, and at what stages of these illnesses. Hopefully, my own personal wishes may make it easier for you to decide what is best for you. Please remember, however, there are no right or wrong decisions here, and my wishes may be very, very different than yours. Most important, maybe you don't have to do it as soon as this session is over, but complete your forms if you don't have any, or change them based on what you heard tonight if you think differently about what you would want. Now, I know there are going to still be some of you who are still going to have problems filling out the forms, and you're still not going to pull them out of the drawer, or maybe you will put the things you printed out back in the drawer. If you can't fill out the forms, please discuss these issues with your family. If you have difficulties talking about these issues with your families, perhaps a suggestion is a short video of your desires that you should tell someone about, and that would help people know exactly what you want if, God forbid, you had a serious problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and Rav Sherlo.
One of the principles in ethics is that there is nothing that you can say it's always right. And there's nothing that, and under any circumstances and in any case, this is the right thing to do. I'm saying it about everything, murder, for instance. So to kill people, to kill someone is not ethical. It's against everything. But there are circumstances where now in Gaza, that's what we are doing. We're fighting. And then you have to exactly define when is it the right thing to do and when it is the wrong thing to do. And everything in ethics has borders, has lines. Why am I starting here? Because after saying so many important and pursuing words about signing those orders and advanced orders, I want to be very careful and very sensitive and remind us also that there are boundaries. There are boundaries from two kinds. One that we spoke, and it was I don't want to call it a shadow, but it was in every word that we said, that there are things that you are permitted to do, and there are things that it's prohibited to do. For instance, to shut down the ventilator or whatever, this is not according to halacha, it's not according to the law. So therefore, there are things that we know, and we have to work according to those guidelines. But I want also to be to emphasize and to say that we have to be very careful at thinking what exactly do we want that things will be done when we are giving those instructions, because everyone will say now that he doesn't want to suffer. Okay, so therefore my instructions will be, if I'm starting to suffer, then I don't want to live anymore. It's things that we're thinking about them now. But when chas v'shalom, when we'll get to this point, many cases we know that suffering, we will suffer in order to stay alive, to be in our grandchildren weddings, and to and you know, people want to live. Or I know I spoke with someone my age, and I'm probably younger than many of our audience, and he said, you know what, if I need diapers, I don't want to live anymore. So I can understand that these are the feelings when you're 60 years old, or above 60. But when you get to 80, or you have a family, or you have a reason to live, it's completely different. So we have to find a kind of mechanical way in order to recheck our decisions and not make decisions that are very, they look very nice now, but they will be different when we'll reach this age of these situations. So first of all, according to the law, and we heard it before, every 5 years, and there are limits, and we have to check exactly, because there are all kinds of ways to give advanced instructions, and therefore there are also different rules, and when there is a different expiry date of our orders, but we have to be very aware of that, not only because of the law, but also because of us, because our decisions are being changed during life, and as long, and many things that we see as a disaster when we are younger, we understand that when we are getting older, we need help, we need assistance, things are becoming more complicated and whatever, and we're getting not only used to that, but relax with that. This is life. So we have to be very careful signing or giving those instructions about treatments, about behavior, about whatever, without thinking, not what do we want that will be done now when we're comparing, when we are completely healthy and when we'll collapse, but when we'll get older and things will look different from our observation point when we'll be there. So I want to emphasize that life can, we can carry some suffering. We need to educate ourselves that when we need assistance and when we need help, it's okay to get it. It's not that all over the life we supported our family, we schlepped there on our shoulders, and okay, and there's time that things are being changed and we are weak and we need this help and assistance. So therefore, so big shot, or not so full of proudness, but modesty and understanding that this is the situations, and sometimes our dignity or sometimes our self-image will be lower. So what? So what I want to say is that before signing or before giving those instructions, reminding ourselves that we are not, these are life, and there is a period of time that we are declining and we are going backwards, if we can say that thing, and it's okay. That will avoid giving very extreme advanced instructions that will say, nothing. We want, if we'll start to go down the steps, we don't want to do anything to do it, and it's the wrong thing to do because of two reasons. The first one is that many times when we'll reach this point, we will want to stay alive. We will agree to do things, but we will not be able to express our wish and our willing. So we have to be very careful. And also, this is the right thing to do from the moral, from the ethical point of view, and not saying that if life are not completely with the power and with our abilities, then they don't have any value. This is very dangerous, and this is something wrong to say. So I want to say that this is the reason I want to speak about that. After pursuing and after saying that we have to give instructions and after saying that we don't have to suffer very hard, and after all those things, we must remember also the other side of the coin and to be very careful of giving extreme instructions that are based on the fact that we don't want anything to be done and we will prefer to leave this world as fast as possible. This is not the situation, and this is not the right thing to do. And we have to balance between our the things that we are thinking about and thinking about now what will we think when we'll be in the elderly age.
Okay, thank you very much. One general comment which we received, which deserves some consideration, is for individuals who don't have close family. Perhaps you could both speak to what considerations or advice you'd give as to how to find relevant proxies for those types of individuals based on your experiences.
I can say from practically that we have in Zohar until 120 a few families and a few even couples that wrote in the instructions that if there'll be a debate, we want that a rabbi or from Zohar ad 120 to make the decisions. It's frightening, but we have it here. I don't want to try to convince people to do that. But it's only one example. If there's someone that you trust, and if there's someone that you have any connection, it's better. But if you want a kind of, I'll call ourselves authorities or whatever, it's also okay. I want to say something about Zohar. One important thing in our system is that the rabbi works together with a social worker. It's a staff. And when you'll call, if someone will call the hotline and will ask to consultate, he'll get immediately a meeting with a rabbi that was trained and was educated by us, and a social worker, a very professional one, and together they'll do also the halachic and ethical work and the relationship and the emotional work together and with the whole family, whatever. And this is an option, but I'm giving it not as the ultimate solution, but also only as a example. Who can you refer to when you feel that you don't have anyone that is a close relative?
So it doesn't necessarily have to be a family member. If you have a very good friend, a neighbor, someone who knows you well, or just someone you feel comfortable to ask, you can give them all the information. They should get more information from you because they may not know you as well as a family member would, but that works also. Someone asked about being out of the country. I have several friends who travel a lot and have kids here and also in the United States. All the family came together for Pesach. And they had the kids be their proxies, the ones in the States for when they were in the States, the ones in Israel for when they were in Israel, and they arranged for everyone to sign and do everything together when they were here for the Chagim.
Okay, another question. If there are two equal proxies who disagree over the treatment, what typically happens, or what?
Well, again, it depends on if they're equivalent or not. If you've given priority, the person on top of the list, again, you have to know who your proxies are. And if you have children who you think would be better decision makers or not, you probably want to put them on the top of the list as opposed to others. One of the questions that came up before is how do you decide with the families? And many times the family members do not agree. And for the physician who wants to do what's best for the patient, we usually don't come to the family till there's a consensus of the medical professions, the doctors, the nurses, and social workers, what we think is best. And then making a medical decision, we try not to make a decision until all the family are pretty much unanimous and there's a consensus of what's best for the patient, because we can make a medical decision about what we think is best, but more important is that family who have to live with each other afterwards, and to have a cohesive family unit is more important than sometimes making the right medical decision.
Okay, this is a fairly specific question, but if someone asks, is there a halachic problem for a family not calling for Mada for a dying patient and instead waiting for the patient to die without concern for intervention?
Depends what are the circumstances and what is his situation. But if there are many cases, not only one, that this is the right thing to do. If someone is very close to death without any horizon, and he asks, I want to die at home, and I don't want to, actually, I'll say it in the most extreme way that I can, taking him to the hospital by mother may be a kind of an attack or torture even. I'm saying it's very extreme. So there are many cases when we are talking about end of life and very close to the end of life, that this is the right thing to do, not to call mother and to respect his wish to die at home and not to do anything. This is part of our the consultation that people call us on the hotline, and we, together with them and the medical staff, say that if chas v'shalom this will happen, this is the right thing to do. And in other cases, even sometimes when he was taken to the hospital and he insists that he wants to go back home, he wants to die in his bed, and he doesn't want any treatment or whatever, this is okay. I'm saying again, under the circumstances, the medical situation. And this is the reason why this event that we are having now is very important, because there is, I said it before, there is image, a wrong image that the halacha requests and demands that we'll do everything in order to have another grief, or even if it's with suffering, even if it's with not any kind of horizon, if it's a very complicated situation that there's no chance and whatever. And we are here to say this is a wrong approach, and there are situations that this is the right thing to do, not to call Mada, and to let our relatives and our close people and our beloved people to leave the world silent and not in the emergency room.
Yeah, if we can, just one last two related questions. Somebody asks basically, when do you recommend, based on the fact that it's mentioned that the form is valid for 5 years, do you recommend that they do it sooner or wait until they're more advanced age? And the question is, if you submit a medical wishes form and don't need it for the next 5 years, will some reminder be provided by the authorities that it's no longer applicable?
Yeah, so you should do it as soon as possible. This is not just for old people. Young people have traffic accidents and things happen. So if you're an adult, you should do these things as soon as possible and let people know what you would want. The Ministry of Health reminds you before the 5-year term comes up to renew your forms. So they will let you know. In the meantime, if things change, you might want to change it earlier. And in the form that said 5 years, you can ask them to do it less than 5 years. Most people, I would recommend doing as long as possible, and the maximum is 5 years. If you want to change it before, and you can do that, but otherwise they send a reminder so that you can update it.
Okay. And just to conclude, Professor Sprung, clearly your comments affected people personally. A few people asked if you would be interested in sending a copy of your own directives. That could be helpful for them. That's obviously up to you, but a few people have asked.
So I would say my directive that I actually filled out is not as expansive and specific as my lecture was. So the 2 parts that are in my Ipui Koach, if I sent it to you, are having 3 or more organ system failures or lacking, permanent cognitive functioning. That's what's on my form. But all the other specifics about suffering and having terminal illnesses, that is something I wrote out and gave to my proxies. And what I can do is I've changed the lecture about 3 or 4 times, and I changed it since I sent the last one in, I think yesterday. I will update it, and I will send it in, and we can put that online, because the lectures themselves have a lot more information than my Ipui Koach does. And I think that would be more helpful for people.
Right. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you both very much. And thank you everybody for joining. Best wishes for a quiet night ahead for Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael, and only peaceful days ahead. Thank you again, and good night.
Thank you.
Mm.